The HOA zip-tied a compliance warning to my dog's collar. I didn't send an angry email. I bought the trails their kids play on and charge them for sunlight. The first thing I noticed wasn't the smell, it was the smoke. Thick, bitter smoke curling from the side trench like a warning flare over the Wyoming plains. I slammed my truck's brakes so hard the tires screamed against gravel, sending a cloud of red dust into the morning sun. There, right where the waterline repair had just been finished last week, sat a solid slab of fresh black asphalt. Poured straight across the pipe trench, embedded in the center was a freshly bolted metal sign that read, HOA access only, restricted zone. I blinked twice. My ranch had stood here for 97 years. There had never been a single HOA meeting, notice, or vote within 10 miles of this place. And now we're branding it like it was part of their suburban fantasy land. I stepped out of my truck slowly, boots crunching the scorched gravel. The closer I got, the clearer it was. This wasn't just concrete. It was an intentional blockade. Whoever did this used tar, layered asphalt, and even sealed the pipe edges with epoxy. That trench had been dug to fix a burst water line that supplied my west pasture and cattle shed. Now it was sealed shut like a tomb. I stood in silence for a moment before spotting the little silver sticker on the corner of the metal sign. Cedar Pine Heights HOA, Property Management Committee. My jaw tightened. That was a neighborhood development a half-mile north, the one with tan stucco homes, plastic flamingos, and too many lawn signs about community spirit. I'd kept my distance. Now apparently they weren't keeping theirs. The ringleader? Karen Ellison, newly elected HOA president with the charisma of a clipboard and the diplomacy of a sledgehammer. She moved in just 7 months ago, but according to every neighbor within shouting distance, she'd already filed over 40 noise complaints, held 3 emergency meetings about wildlife intrusion, and tried to have someone cited for planting lavender. Her second in command was Toby Miller, a retired IRS analyst who looked like he enjoyed paperwork more than conversation. The third wheel in their HOA tricycle was Sandra Vale, a former school hall monitor turned property patrol, who now walked her terrier twice daily while staring through binoculars at anyone using non-numeral mulch. I knew their type, smug suburban sheriffs trying to civilize the wild. For the past 2 months, they'd been inching closer, figuratively and literally. First came the flyers, optional HOA beautification program, ranchers encouraged to participate. I tossed them. Then the letters, your livestock fence is visible from HOA adjacent roads and may diminish aesthetic alignment. Next was a surveyor from the HOA caught measuring the easement on my southern border. I chased him off with a friendly wave and a not-so-friendly rake. I even found a neatly printed envelope on my gate, unsigned, that said, you are part of this community whether you like it or not. The last straw before today was a bizarre courtesy call left on my voicemail from Toby, in which he suggested I consider attending the HOA's spring compliance orientation. I deleted it after the first 10 seconds. But nothing compared to what I found that afternoon. My dog, Gus, a 90-pound Pyrenees mix with the temperament of a sleepy bear, hadn't returned from his usual round along the fence line. I searched the yard and found him crouched behind the woodpile, ears down, whining. As I got closer, I saw it, a plastic zip tie looped around his collar with a laminated tag dangling from it. My stomach turned as I read the words, Property Control Reminder, Keep All Animals Contained, Cedar Pine Heights, OH. I stared at it for a long time, then ripped it off and crumpled it in my fist. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't miscommunication. This was war dressed in khaki pants and name tags, and if they wanted to fence me out, they better be ready for the fence I was about to build around them. By the time I yanked that zip tie off Gus's collar and tossed it into the fire pit, I knew exactly where this was going. This wasn't just a petty neighbor feud anymore. This was a full-court press disguised in HOA stationery. And like most things bureaucratic, the next move came quietly, dressed in khakis and plausible deniability. It started the following morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I noticed 3 new wooden survey stakes hammered into the side of my southern fence, bright orange flags fluttering like tiny declarations of war. I hadn't authorized any survey, not from the county, not from any land office. So I hopped on my ATV and followed the markers. They led me straight to the cul-de-sac at Cedar Pine's edge. where a silver Ford SUV sat idling. A man in a neon vest, clipboard in hand, was measuring the ditch with a laser level like he was planning an airstrip. "Can I help you?" I asked, flat. "Just checking boundary lines for shared utility access," he replied too quickly. "Whose utility?" "Cedar Pine Heights HOA. I smiled without humor. "This ain't shared, partner. This is my damn ranch." He backed off, but he didn't look surprised, just rehearsed. Later that week, the air buzzed with the low hum of a drone. I looked up and spotted a slick little quadcopter hovering 20 feet above my back pasture. Not a county tag, not law enforcement. I traced it visually until it zipped back toward the HOA's direction, disappearing behind one of the new cookie-cutter rooftops with solar panels and zero shame. I'd had just about enough. That evening, a thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a printed page with block text. "Your visual landscape presents disruption to the community's aesthetic unity. Please consider realignment of visible structures." Beneath that, a picture of my old red barn. I laughed. Then I muttered, "Realignment, this," and fed the envelope to my wood stove. But it wasn't funny the next night. I came back late from town, Gus in the passenger seat, dead asleep, and found my lower access road partially flooded. Turns out the trench we just filled with gravel and piping had been tampered with. Someone poured wet cement straight into the pipe opening, then covered it with loose dirt. I dug it out with a shovel, hands freezing in the cold, and there it was, gray slurry still curing around cracked PVC. They didn't even try to hide it well. This was sabotage. Not by accident, not by interpretation, intentional, criminal. I drove straight to the county zoning office the next morning. I laid everything out: the poured cement, the drone, the surveyors, the fake letters. The clerk, a young guy named Trevor who smelled like energy drinks and pine cleaner, scanned my address and paused. "Huh," he muttered. "This property was recently flagged for transitional zoning." "What the hell does that mean?" I asked. "It was reclassified 2 weeks ago for shared rural residential buffer access. That usually happens after a vote. But there's no signed notice here." "And voted?" He squinted. "Looks like it was part of an online community petition. Email circulation. No direct mail notice required since the surrounding community shares jurisdiction." "But I'm not in the HOA, I said, louder than I meant. He shrugged. "Well, they kind of voted around you." That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I stared at the papers Trevor printed for me like they were in another language. I needed backup, someone who could smell legal manipulation from 100 yards. So I called my cousin, Mason Hill, land law attorney. Graduated top of his class from UT Austin. Drives a pickup, but argues like he's in front of the Supreme Court. The next morning, Mason walked in wearing boots, a leather satchel, and a grin that always meant trouble. "Jake," he said, scanning the mess on my table, "looks like we've got ourselves a good old-fashioned zoning ambush. You ready to bury some HOA bylaws?" I looked at Gus, who was still wearing the faint mark of the zip tie on his neck, and nodded. "Yeah," I said, "let's dig." But Mason wasn't the only one with plans, because 3 miles away, Karen had just called for an emergency HOA territorial reassessment. And this time, they weren't sending flyers. They were sending lawyers. The thing about fighting dirty is you better know how to clean up well. And Mason knew how to sanitize war. Less than 48 hours after reviewing the rezoning ambush, he'd registered a shell company under the name Gray Mesa Holdings, LLC, listed at a P.O. box in Jackson Hole with zero connections to either of us. It was airtight. On paper, it looked like a quiet private investment fund focusing on rural development. In reality, it was a land acquisition shark in sheep's clothing. Mason's plan was simple but brilliant. Buy out every private parcel surrounding Cedar Pine Heights that wasn't already HOA controlled, and most of it surprisingly was up for grabs. Small strips, easements, old recreational tracks used for walking trails and picnic sites. Why? Because the HOA had been using them without actually owning them. They assumed usage meant ownership. Big mistake. I took the low-tech route, drove around the outer rim of the community, boots on the ground, coffee in hand, and knocked on doors. Most of the landowners were older folks who had no love for the HOA. Some had been pushed out. Others were just waiting for a reason to sell. One man, Mr. Liddell, nearly hugged me when I asked if he'd be willing to part with the stretch of forest bordering the HOA dog park. Those people made me tear down my deer blind, he grunted. Said it offended their Sunday jogs. $3,000 and a handshake later, that deer blind stood legally in Gray Mesa's name. Then came the walking trails. 5 connected parcels owned by families that moved out over the last decade. Most were behind on land taxes. We cleared the liens, paid the back fees, and sealed the deeds. By the end of the second week, Gray Mesa Holdings owned 43% of the recreational landscape Cedar Pine used in their marketing brochures. But we weren't done. The crown jewel was still out there, the narrow strip of land that ran parallel to the main entrance road, technically a driveway easement, that every HOA resident used daily. The problem? It didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to Cora Maddox, an 84-year-old widow who lived in a red farmhouse half a mile east of town. Her property line cut straight through what the HOA had always assumed was communal approach access. Mason and I paid her a visit. She served us lemonade in jelly jars and asked us to sit on the porch. We explained what we were doing, and her face lit up like Christmas morning. You know what those HOA folks did to me, she asked. They made me tear down my chicken coop because it didn't match the architectural theme. Said I was disrupting suburban cohesion. I've been waiting 10 years to get them back. She paused, then added, and I still got the coop in storage. I laughed. Mason offered her fair market value for the land, but she waved him off. I'll sell it to you for half, she said. Just promise me you'll make them squirm. And that evening we signed the papers, and with that signature, we now controlled the only legal access road into the Cedar Pine community. I didn't say a word to Karen or her clipboard brigade. Not yet. This wasn't the moment to gloat. This was the moment to prepare the hammer. Because when you control the board, you don't play the game. You set the rules. And I was about to introduce a brand new one. Pay to pass. Or prepare to hike. We didn't wait long. Less than 72 hours after signing the deal with Cora Maddox, Mason drafted the first wave of official letters. On crisp letterhead bearing the Gray Mesa Holdings seal, we notified Cedar Pine Heights HOA that several parcels they'd been informally using were now legally owned private properties. That included their scenic walking trail, picnic loop, dog park, and most importantly, the main access road that ran parallel to the entrance. The letter was polite, professional, and cold as Wyoming frost. In short, they had 2 options. Either sign a usage agreement and start paying 3 times the normal landscape fee to access and maintain those areas, or forfeit all rights to them, effective immediately. The best line was Mason's addition at the end. Failure to comply will result in visible and irreversible access adjustments. He said it sounded like a warning. I said it sounded like poetry. The next morning, I personally delivered the first letter, along with a fresh cup of coffee and a camera crew. Okay, not really, but I did leave the letter with a laminated copy taped to a giant red billboard. We installed it on Cora's former fence line, facing directly into the HOA's main entrance. White letters, bold and unapologetic. Pay respite, respect, or pay payment. Beneath that, in smaller font, trespassers will be educated. I stepped back and admired it for a moment. Gus sat beside me, tail thumping. What do you think? I asked. He barked once. Good enough. It didn't take long for the fallout. That same evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting inside their pristine little clubhouse. We didn't even need to guess what happened. We had eyes. One of the younger homeowners, frustrated with Karen's constant power trips, leaked a phone video from the meeting. It started with Karen slamming the Gray Mesa letter onto the table, yelling something about hostile land takeovers and unconstitutional fence terrorism. Sandra in the background was waving her clipboard like she was conducting a symphony of outrage. And Toby stood up, muttered something about not signing up for land war, and tossed the clubhouse keys on the table like a man resigning from a bad soap opera. The meeting devolved into chaos. Voices yelling, chairs scraping, and someone, bless their soul, screamed, "This is why we don't mess with Cowboy." By the next week, 4 separate homeowners had called me directly, asking if they could lease access to their favorite spots on the trail or secure their family picnic area with a short-term usage contract. One guy even asked if I had land available for a shed. He said he didn't trust the HOA to protect lawnmowers anymore. I told him the same thing. You're welcome so long as you're not here representing Karen. Most were polite. One brought pie. Karen, on the other hand, went quiet for about 48 hours. Then came the retaliation. It was a Tuesday evening when I noticed the south path to my equipment shed, a rarely used gravel road that cuts behind the tree line, had a strange smell, burnt rubber and tar. I drove out to check and found a stretch of the access lane covered in fresh asphalt, not even leveled properly. Piles of steaming blacktop blocked the entrance. Whoever did it hadn't even bothered to post signage. Just a big, messy slab poured right over my ranch's functional path. A familiar silver HOA sticker was slapped onto a wooden stake jammed into the edge. HOA Infrastructure Improvement. Thank you for your patience. I wasn't patient. I wasn't even mildly amused. I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, Gus growling low behind me. They just pour a street on my damn driveway, I muttered. I kicked the asphalt with my boot. It was still soft, still fresh, still disrespectful. They wanted to escalate, fine. I could escalate harder, cleaner, and more legally. And Mason? He was already 2 steps ahead. He pulled out his phone, snapped pictures, and said, "Jake, I think it's time we sent them a second letter. This one comes with a bill." I nodded, eyes still on the steaming blacktop. "And maybe a camera tower, because if the HOA wanted to keep playing games, it was time I showed them what a fully lit, legally streamed checkmate looked like." By the next morning, the smell of tar was still lingering, and so was my irritation. But irritation doesn't win land wars, evidence does. So Mason and I did what any 2 men with a grudge and a budget would do. We set up a 16-foot camera tower disguised as a wind sensor post, perched high above the newly paved sabotage path. It had thermal, night vision, and full wireless feed to a cloud server. Well, we didn't have to wait long. Just 3 nights later, at 2:13 a.m., the motion sensor tripped. I checked the live feed and saw 2 figures creeping down the trail. One tall, wearing a reflective vest. The other, shorter, carrying a clipboard even at night. Toby and Sandra, caught red-handed supervising a second load of hot asphalt being dumped from an unmarked trailer. Sandra even paused to take a photo, like it was some twisted HOA scrapbook moment. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. We clipped the footage, packaged it neatly, and sent it directly to the local zoning board, the mayor's office, and Sheriff Lantry, who happened to be an old friend of my dad's. No theatrics, just the facts, time-stamped evidence of private property sabotage. By noon, I got a call from the sheriff himself. "Jake," he said, "you mind if we swing by to take a formal statement?" "I'll put on coffee," I replied. Mason already had affidavits drafted and notarized. We handed over everything, stamps, plate numbers, audio clips of Sandra muttering about finishing this before Jake wakes up. The look on Sheriff Lantry's face was pure gold. They really thought they could asphalt their way out of a property dispute. But if you thought Carrie would slow down after that, you'd be wrong. Less than 48 hours later, I was served with a formal complaint. The HOA had filed a claim stating I had deliberately damaged their community clubhouse with a drone mount noise cannon, citing disturbance and property defacement. It came complete with a grainy photo of what looked like a plastic speaker taped to a drone, clearly not mine. Their so-called evidence was a blurry printout that could have been ripped from a teenager's TikTok. Still, protocol is protocol. I was summoned to the sheriff's office for a statement. I showed up with my drone, all flight logs, and camera timestamps. The drone hadn't left its dock in 3 days, and the logs proved it. Mason handed over the feed data and a notarized log from our cloud server. Sheriff Lantry looked exhausted. "Jake," he muttered, rubbing his eyes, "I swear, this HOA is going to be the reason I retire early." "You and me both," I said. But the good news? Their fake evidence backfired, especially when we pointed out that the timestamp of the alleged incident was during a heavy rainstorm, and my drone wasn't waterproof. Case dismissed before it even started. That night, just when I thought we'd finally earned a moment of quiet, Gus started barking like hell. It was close to 11 p.m., and I was just finishing a bottle of Topo Chico when I heard the low growl turn into full-blown rage. I grabbed the flashlight and headed out the back door. Gus was near the east fence line, nose to the ground, hackles up. I swept the beam around and saw it. A flicker of orange near the electrical trench by the shed. Fire. Not big, but real. Someone had stuffed dry grass and accelerant under the fencing, trying to ignite the brush near my backup power lines. I stomped it out, heart pounding, hands shaking. I checked the perimeter cams. One had been turned slightly off angle, like someone had nudged it deliberately. no clear face, just a dark figure sprinting toward the trees. But the detail that chilled me wasn't the flame or the near miss. It was what I found in the dirt nearby, a torn corner of a clipboard with the HOA seal partially burned, half melted into the grass. And that's when I realized they weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were trying to break something they couldn't control. And that meant they were about to lose everything. The scorched grass hadn't cooled yet when Mason turned to me and said, "We're not just defending land anymore, Jake. We're defending narrative." He was right. At this point, facts weren't enough. People needed to see what was happening, needed to hear the truth without Karen's HO-flavored spin. So we made a call, then a few more. By the end of the week, we'd arranged a full press conference right at the edge of Cedar Pine Heights, billboard in the background, cameras front and center. I showed up wearing a clean button-up, my old Stetson and boots caked with just enough dirt to prove a point. And Gus sat beside me like a security detail with a tail. I stepped up to the mic as reporters shuffled papers and neighbors peeked from their driveways. "My name is Jake Coleman," I said calmly. "I'm not a troublemaker. I'm not here to destroy anything. I'm here because for 5 generations, my family worked this land. We raised cattle, we minded our business, and in the last few months, I've had my gate welded shut, my water line sabotaged, my dog tagged like contraband, and last night, someone tried to burn down my shed." I paused. "I didn't start this war, but I'm going to end it, lawfully, publicly, and without backing down. I'm not a vandal, I'm a boundary keeper." Then came the real headline. "Effective immediately, Great Mesa Holdings is willing to offer the Cedar Pine HOA a conditional peace agreement. If the current HOA board resigns, all illegal claims are withdrawn, and a formal apology is issued to the residents and to me, then we will renegotiate access at a reduced usage rate." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Karen's clipboard would be shaking on its own. The press loved it. A rancher standing up to suburban tyranny. Made for TV. And local Channel 7 gave it exactly the kind of coverage you'd expect. Slow zooms, dramatic headlines, and a tagline, "When fences turn to fire, the ranch revolt at Cedar Pine." But it wasn't the broadcast that did the damage. It was the memes. Someone screen capped Karen from the leaked HOA meeting, frozen mid-scream with her clipboard midair. The internet dubbed her clipboard queen. My favorite version had her labeled Fence Force 1 with the caption, "Declaring war over weeds since 2023. Within 48 hours, the post hit over 200,000 shares. That was when the real pressure began. 3 board members resigned. Sandra, binoculars veiled, deleted her Facebook and put her house up for sale. Toby, word was he applied for a job in a different HOA 2 counties over. But Karen didn't quit. She doubled down. I woke up one morning to find a certified letter from the Bureau of Land Management taped to my ranch gate. They were conducting a formal review of my recent property acquisitions and requested documentation on land usage, trail access, and environmental impact. Apparently, Karen had submitted a formal complaint stating I had illegally disrupted public access corridors and endangered a federally protected heritage trail, a trail no one had mentioned in 40 years, and that ran along an old dry creek bed no one used. Classic Karen. Digging through law books until she found a clause dusty enough to weaponize, Mason skimmed the letter and groaned. "They're trying to drag us into bureaucratic purgatory." I nodded. "If they can't beat us on the ground, they'll try to drown us in forms." That evening, I walked back out to the edge of the fence line. The billboard still stood tall. Gus was pacing, sensing something was off. In the distance, the HOA clubhouse was lit up again. Karen's SUV sat parked out front, and beside it, a black sedan I didn't recognize. Someone in a suit stepped out, briefcase in hand. I turned to Mason. "Think they brought in backup?" He squinted. "That ain't local." I took a breath. "Then get the files ready. If she's going federal, we're going constitutional. Because if Karen thought paperwork was her strongest weapon, she was about to meet mine."
By the time the man in the suit stepped out of the black sedan, I already knew this wasn't just another HOA stunt. He wore government shoes, the kind that don't touch dirt unless something's gone federal. Mason stepped forward first, greeting him with that polite, dangerous calm lawyers save for bureaucrats. "Name's Agent Lowell," the man said, flashing a badge from the Bureau of Land Management. He kept it brief. "Mr. Coleman, We've received several formal complaints regarding unlawful obstruction of heritage access paths, unpermitted land development, and potential environmental disruption. Effective immediately, you are under a temporary development freeze. Within 400 feet of the Cedar Pine border, pending review.
My stomach dropped, but I didn't blink. This was Karen's last card, and she was playing it big. Mason pulled him aside for clarification, but I already knew the move. She wasn't fighting me on fences anymore. She dug into the federal code books, found some loophole from a 1982 Preservation Act about unaltered pedestrian corridors, and claimed that the old Dry Creek bed, now part of my grazing field, was once a natural trail used by the original settlers. No one had walked it in decades. The last time it saw human activity was probably when my grandfather chased off a bobcat with a shovel. But Karen filed her report, threw in some pixelated aerial shots, and named herself Community Environmental Liaison on the form. I'll give her this. The woman knew how to weaponize a printer. So we shifted tactics. I didn't scream. I didn't storm the HOA gates. I just went silent and handed the storm to Mason. He compiled a 200-page counterfile titled Land Usage History and Procedural Violations, Cedar Pine HOA v. Gray Mesa Holdings. It came with time-stamped drone footage of Karen trespassing, emails from neighbors thanking us for cleaning the trail area, a notarized petition signed by 42 residents affirming no knowledge of any active heritage trail, and most importantly, legal deeds proving private ownership uninterrupted since 1926. Every form was in triplicate, every signature certified. While the BLM reviewed our submission, something else cracked. A city clerk from the zoning office flagged an irregularity. One of Karen's key filings had used forged community signatures, names of homeowners who had moved away years ago. When cross-checked, 2 of the signers turned out to be deceased. That was enough for the county ethics board to open a formal investigation. Karen's title as community liaison came under fire. A reporter from Channel 7 caught wind of it and aired a news segment. Clipboard Queen accused of signature fraud. The meme was back, but this time it had teeth. I didn't say a word to Karen. I didn't need to. The system was finally catching up. Instead, I focused on the people who mattered. I met with residents who had reached out, Jason and Megan from Lot 12, Mrs. Delane from Lot 3, and invited them to walk the trail with me, this time as partners. You want access? I told them. You've got it if you're not here to control it. We drafted early terms for a new land use agreement, voluntary, low-cost, community first. No HOA, no dues, just shared responsibility. And the response was overwhelming. But the fire wasn't out yet. Just as the ethics board confirmed their investigation into Karen's conduct, a new complaint hit my inbox. This one from the Regional Planning Committee, citing a series of interconnected claims about psychological distress, airspace interference, and visual landscape pollution caused by our camera towers. One of the phrases used, skyline harmony disruption. I had to read it twice. It sounded like a spa package, not a zoning concern. Mason laughed out loud when he read it. Jake, I think they're trying to trademark the sky. I shook my head. No, they're trying to bury us in paperwork and hope we run out of patience. Mason leaned back, laced his fingers. Then we'll beat them at their own game, one form at a time. And that's when the phone rang again. This time it wasn't the sheriff. It was a man from the state attorney general's office asking if I had time to answer a few questions about misuse of nonprofit authority, fraudulent filings, and property harassment linked to a HOA president named Karen D. Ellison, and just enough coffee. The call from the state attorney general's office didn't just signal the end. It lit the fuse on it. Within a week, Karen D. Ellison was served with an official cease and desist order, pending investigation for fraudulent filings, abuse of power, and misrepresentation of community authority. 2 days later, Cedar Pine Heights HOA held an emergency vote, this time without Karen in the room. The result? Unanimous. The HOA board was dissolved, effective immediately. Karen was barred from holding any community leadership position for life, and her name was quietly removed from every directory and email chain like she'd never existed. I guess even suburban empires can crumble, especially when they're built on paper and pettiness. But the fallout didn't stop with Karen. Without the HOA structure shielding them, several homes inside Cedar Pine were subject to property reassessment thanks to the rezoning mess she triggered. Some folks saw their taxes triple overnight. The ones who had backed her hardest were now staring down the barrel of a four-figure hike. It wasn't vengeance, it was math. You mess with land value, you play with real numbers. I didn't gloat. I knew some of them were just pawns in her game. So I did something she never would have done. I offered help. Mason and I sent out a letter called the Cedar Ridge Renewal Pact. It outlined a simple offer. Any resident willing to volunteer at least 10 hours a month to maintain the shared land trails, gardens, irrigation would receive a land use rebate through a legal access agreement. In short, pitch in and we'll lower the pressure. Within a week, more than 30 residents signed up. Jason and Megan helped plant native flowers around the pond. Mrs. Delane painted new signage along the walking trail. Even Toby, the former HOA treasurer, showed up with gardening gloves and a thermos of iced tea. Didn't think I'd be weeding beside a man I once accused of mailbox misplacement, he said. I smirked. Didn't think you'd own a flannel shirt. Progress. The energy shifted fast. What was once tension became rhythm. Saturdays turned into community work days. Kids planted vegetables behind the old tool shed. We installed solar lighting along the main path. One afternoon, I caught a group of teenagers hanging a handmade sign near the tree line. Weed patrol, but the friendly kind. Even Gus seemed more relaxed, trotting alongside kids who used to cross the street when they saw him. Without Karen and her clipboard shadow looming, people stopped being nervous and started being neighbors. And then came the final piece. I had the old gate post sanded down, repainted, and fitted with a new steel sign, this one laser cut, welded by hand, and bolted into the stone, with a kind of permanence Karen never understood. It read, Cedar Ridge, a place for neighbors, not enforcers. No logos, no fines, just a reminder of what we'd fought for. That evening, as the sun dipped behind a hill, casting long gold lines across the gravel road, I took Gus for a walk. We passed the edge of the trail, now clean, trimmed, and dotted with wildflowers. As we neared the east gate, I spotted it. A warped, half-melted piece of plastic buried in the soil near the fence post. I recognized the shape immediately. It was part of Karen's old clipboard, the last remnant of her reign. I bent down, picked it up gently, and walked it to the fire pit near the barn. I dropped it in, watched the flame catch, and felt the smallest smile crack across my face. Gus sat beside me, tail sweeping the dust. The clipboard sizzled, popped, then collapsed into ash. The wind took what was left. But just as I turned to head back to the cabin, Mason called out from the porch, holding a white envelope. Jake, he said, waving it, looks like we've got company from the county again. Something about a charter petition? I raised an eyebrow. Did we just get offered our own district? He grinned. We might be going HOA proof for good. And just like that, the last gate finally opened for good. They tried to fence him out, so he bought the fence, the field, and the road they thought they controlled. But Jake didn't just win with paperwork and property lines. He won by turning confrontation into community, red tape into redemptive action. This wasn't just a land war. It was a story of drawing lines with dignity and defending them with grit, not spite. Because in a world full of Karens and clipboards, sometimes the boldest move is offering a second chance with a smile and a shovel. If you've ever faced off with an entitled HOA or had to fight for what's rightfully yours, drop your story in the comments. And if you stuck with us to the end, hit that like, share with your neighborly friends, and don't forget to subscribe. Around here, respect is the only fee, but hitting that bell icon, that's free real estate.